Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday. Cheers. It's 8 o'clock. Feels like 7. What a weird assault on the people the standard time is. It is strange. I don't know about the rest of you. My internal clock is obviously all messed up today. Trying to figure that out. Today sped by like a rocket. Sped by. I appreciated a little bit more light. It is not basically midnight here as I'm doing this thing. But I felt off all day. And I know that's how that goes. I know that's how that works. Still strange. And if you go back and look at standard time and daylight savings time, all of it, it's got me thinking a lot about manipulatable reality. Because you just decide to do it and suddenly you tell people what time is. And supposedly time is objective reality, but you can move it around, do whatever you want with it. And then all of a sudden, when you start thinking about where time came from and where those agreements came from in the first place, that's really strange. It's a really, really odd thing. But I have a lot of time on my hands. I'm on spring break, which I've been in school now. Let me see, 34 years. 34 years, my 34th spring break. Never get tired of it. Never get tired of it. We deserve it. It's going to be a good time. And the way that it works here and at my university, it always coincides with the beginning of the NCAA tournament, which is one of the best things of my year. I am nothing if not a true blue Hoosier boy. I like the NCAA tournament, also taking place entirely in the state of Indiana this year, which is nice. I'm pumped. My spring breaks are spent doing research and watching college basketball. Can't beat it. Absolute favorite thing. I'm ready for it. I'm in a good mood because of that. Had some good time to do some work. I finished the 3rd chapter of the new book, which is nice. So I finished the 3rd chapter of the new book, which means that I'm currently putting together my research agenda for the 4th chapter, which means a really cool couple of days while I'm doing that. I basically have to do sort of a cursory look over this 4th chapter is going to be the 18th century. Which is, absolutely. NCAA athletes are workers and should be paid. They're being exploited. Absolutely. Cheers to that. But, learning a bunch of new things. And it's kind of fun because you learn the things that you don't know so you can then know them. I enjoy that. That's a cool stage. I like all the stages of this. I like the precursor research, the research, and then the synthesizing into writing. But that opening planning sort of phase is exciting. So I've been diving into capitalist structure in the 18th century. I've been diving into I have a weird thing because, as we get into the 18th century, all of a sudden we have to start getting into the American Revolution and the founding of America, which I covered in American Rule. But now I get to go outside of that original sort of sphere, if you will, and learn on the outside of it. So right now I'm learning a lot more about the roots of the actual revolution, the economics, the religious part of it. And on top of that, something I'm finding really fascinating, which is what happened with England after they lost the American Revolution. And one of the really fascinating things about it that I'm already finding is, we do this thing as Americans. I know this is shocking, but we take everything through our lens and our perspective. So we look at the American Revolution and we're basically like, oh, this is America's story. We won this revolution. But it's part of a world war, between the British and the French and the Dutch and the Spanish. And when you actually start looking at it through that lens and you start looking at how the British Empire reacted to losing the Revolutionary War, gave us in part the police state and law enforcement that we're all currently enjoying right now. So I am really fascinated by this stuff. I spent a good portion of the day sort of looking at that. But the day happened so quick. And now we're at Bourbon Talk, 8 p.m. I, for one, am excited. We have a really good show. We have a lot of questions all over the place. A lot of different things to talk about tonight. I'm pretty pumped. It's good to see everybody. Very, very happy about this. It's beautiful outside. Spent the weekend doing research and picking up pine cones. For anybody who knows anything about rural Georgia, you have two choices. You either pick up pine cones constantly, and it's basically a part-time job, or you surrender to the pine cones. And I had surrendered to the pine cones for long enough, and I reclaimed my land from the pine cones while listening to audiobooks about British penal system. Weird stuff. Weird life right now. But I'm happy to be here. Happy to do this thing. I'll go ahead and start here. Sarah said, so I did not know about the relationship between the birth of modern science and slavery. What are the implications of that? Hey, first time Bourbon Talk. Cheers. Happy you're here. Yeah, I didn't know about the relationship between modern science and slavery either. I think that's one of those weird things. When we think about advancement, we think about it in sort of like a vacuum. We sort of imagine, science and progress are good things naturally, but that's part of the narrative. And if you actually look at the birth of what we would call the scientific revolution, which of course comes on the heels of the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, so to speak, as Petrarch would tell us, we start having a bunch of people who are either rediscovering knowledge that the ancients had and were basically wiped out by the Christians after they took over, which, by the way, I have to tell you, that part of the book, I am so excited for people to read that part of the book, because I have to tell you, it blew my damn hair back when I learned about what had happened when the Christians gained power in ancient Rome. I mean, they just razed civilizations. They just absolutely got rid of knowledge, burnt libraries, massacred people, killed the so-called pagans, who a lot of them were just like, ancient type scientists, got rid of so much information that was out there, so much culture. Awful. And so it starts awakening on the tail end of that, of course, with what we now call the Renaissance. And with the scientific revolution, you have a lot of people who start, bringing up the ideas of the scientific method and physics and all that shit. And so what ends up happening is that most of the people who are involved in that are either wealthy themselves, so they're part of the nobility or part of the elite class, or their education and their work is being funded by these, monarchies or the state, right? They're investing in it. So a lot of the people who are coming up with the idea of modern science, your Bacons, your Boyles, these are people who were really, really tight with the state and really, really tight with the idea of colonization, but also slavery. And so you have the birth of utopianism. And this idea, because before, like with the Middle Ages and back, of course, like back when the Christians were taking power, the entire idea of society is that man is wicked. And what we need to do is to prepare for the apocalypse. Of course, you're living these short, brutal lives. And so the best thing that could possibly happen isn't for your life to be better. It's for the end of the world to happen, and then for the paradise after the end of the world to come to earth, heaven on earth, New Jerusalem, New Heaven, whatever we want to call it. So you're hoping that within your lifetime, the world ends. You're like hoping and praying that you are there when all of a sudden Christ and the armies of God show up and wipe the slate clean. But the biggest fear is that the kingdoms of man aren't going to do enough to help Christ and the armies of God to win the apocalyptic Armageddon battle. So you're constantly, you want to purify humanity, and you want to be on the right side whenever finally you have this apocalyptic final battle. Well, all of a sudden, when the Renaissance happens and you start having this idea of human dignity, or you start having the idea of like ancient knowledge, humanism, right? All of a sudden, you start thinking about life. And a lot of these people who are nobles, they live very, very well. They're on the courts of kings and queens. They don't want to die. They want to live forever. This is one of the reasons why you start having all of these legends about the fountain of youth and like Shangri-La or any of these sort of beautiful paradises. One of them that I found, and this is an interesting thing to look up in your spare time if you want to, it's the legend of Prester John. And Prester John was this mythological white king who ruled over Muslims in some faraway land, right? And he was thousands of years old, because they had overcome, mortality and all that. And they had like these springs that you could get into, and they could make you live for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so you start having this idea of a utopian project, which is, if we can figure out science, if we can figure out the forces of the universe and bend them to our will, we could possibly live forever, and we don't need for the world to end. We can make the world as it is a paradise. So all of a sudden, they're not thinking about apocalypses anymore. They're thinking about a forever paradise on Earth, a utopia. Well, all of these people are just, they are just totally intertwined with the kings and queens and the states. And as those monarchies are exploiting people in the so-called New World, which isn't new at all, and you have a bunch of advanced societies that they go over and kill and enslave and wipe out, they start using the idea of science or progress, because remember the idea that Western civilization is the height of progress. Everything else, because they don't have private property and they don't have money and all of that bullshit, those people are behind. So if we can go over and teach them and use them, then someday we'll be able to realize a utopia or a paradise on Earth without the end of the world. So a lot of these scientists, a lot of these fathers of modern science are utopians. They totally, totally believe in the idea that science and the exploitation of people, if that sounds familiar, yeah, a lot of people are going to suffer. Millions are going to be enslaved, and we have to go over and wipe out cultures over in the so-called New World and, Europeanize them, right? And teach them that white people are better than them and show them that, Jesus was white and so forth. If that may be regrettable, and maybe that's not a good way to treat them, but it's an ends to a means, like eventually, or a means to an ends. I'm a Hoosier. It's hard to get those right sometimes. It's a means to an end. And so, yeah, we're going to have to exploit people and we're going to have to enslave people, but eventually we'll get past it and we'll realize this heaven on earth. And a lot of these people are writing utopian fictions where science overcomes mortality. Of course, a lot of them also talk about forced breeding, all of that bullshit. And so that is more or less the idea of progress. And the implications of it are this. When people talk about so-called Western civilization or America, and they're like, look what we've built, look how great we are, and you want to tear that down. The idea is that progress is a linear line. And we've all heard this, like that the world just gets better every year, and as it moves forward. That idea of progress, of the idea that we are constantly moving towards a better future, is about ignoring the past. It's about ignoring what we've done to get to this place, ignoring who we've exploited, who we've enslaved, who we've mistreated. And eventually what ends up happening is that you overlook all of that stuff and you just keep going and going and going. And then all of a sudden people are like, hey, we have hundreds, if not thousands of years here that we could possibly lose progress if we're not careful. Those are the implications. Is that Western civilization, as we would call it, is built on the exploitation of people and the continued oppression of people. And everyone says, well, I know it's not pleasant, and I know it's not pretty, and I know it's ugly sometimes. And if you really take a look at it, and you look at genocides, and you look at oppressive societies that are engineered to suppress and destroy cultures, yeah, that's pretty ugly. But we're going to make it to that paradise on earth. We're going to become that city on the hill. So yeah, those are the implications of it. That doesn't mean that science is evil. It means that when science is coupled with elitism, it means when science is coupled with white supremacy, it means when science particularly is used to exploit people. And, by the way, for those of you who are paying attention and connecting the dots as I'm talking, exploit the environment. Because all of this is about dominion of man over earth. Tell me if that sounds familiar. Think about that. How much of this is based on the idea that man is supposed to dominate the earth and have dominion over the earth? And they all talk about it. They all talk about it through the lens of trying to reestablish the Garden of Eden. It's weird. Boyle, and by the way, like these people that I'm talking about, like Boyle is, Robert Boyle is trying to establish what was called the empire of man over inferior creatures, which is the Garden of Eden, right? Boyle also directed the East India Company, which was one of the most exploitive corporations of all time. You also have Bacon, who is like one of the leading proponents of colonialism and the exploitation of people. And by the way, they're all alive as these exploitive corporations, and that's where corporations come from, by the way. They all come from the exploitation of people. All of them. That's where the modern corporation comes from. That's where the modern stock market comes from. It's from being able to invest in the exploitation and enslavement of peoples. You can make a little money on the side about that. Feel pretty good about it, I guess. Those are the implications. The foundation is rotten all the way through. I knew it and I suspected it, but until I started doing the research on this new book, I didn't know just how rotten it was. It's rotten. Absolutely rotten. Caleb, I read your article about virtual reality and the Snyder Cut and fracturing reality. What do we do and how did we get here? I wrote about this on Substack. If you haven't been over there, that's Jared Yates Sexton .substack, I think it is .com. Anyway, I wrote this thing because I've been thinking a lot about this. For those of you who didn't see it, we also talked about it in the Muckrake. There is a lot of talk among the tech overlords that there is no way to handle the quote unquote human problem. And the human problem is democracy, by the way, in case you were curious. The problem is the individual. The problem is that there's no way to solve the problems of democracy, the problems of political strife, economic strife, racial strife. There's no way to overcome the limitations of capitalism. And the entire idea, and by the way, I talked to all of you about this a while back. If you've been coming to Bourbon Talks for a while, you heard me talk about this. The problem, and one of the reasons why we have an economic and political crisis that's going to even like lord over what we have now and sort of just, be bigger than it, is because there's nowhere else to go. We don't have a frontier. We don't have, like in the past when we had these political and economic problems, you just spread out. And that's been throughout human history. When there's a concentrated problem and there's too much infighting and there's blood in the streets and people killing each other and there's not enough resources, you send part of them over here and tell them, go find your fortune elsewhere. That's exactly why we want to go to space. That's 100% right. Besides the fact that some of these people recognize that global climate change is real and that they need to get off the planet before it falls apart. So the question now for these wealthy tech elites, there's a couple of questions. And I wrote about this in the Substack article. There are 3 possible solutions to this current crisis. And part of the problem is that our sort of globalist economic structure and political structure doesn't allow room for things to really change that much. The internalities of countries can change. They can sort of move around, but not the larger thing. That's why things feel so immovable and so unchangeable a lot of times. This system is pretty ironclad until it collapses, and it's heading towards a collapse. There are three solutions. Well, I guess there'd be four. One would be to get rid of basic democracy and turn this into a technological dystopia, which, by the way, is what China more or less is right now. It would have to be a system where we're basically oppressed and all of our rights are taken away and we don't really have the ability to vote. They'll give us the illusion of voting because no voting would be awful. There's no way that they would sustain that. They would give us the illusion of voting, and the sort of technocratic, dystopian surveillance state would just get out of control. The second solution is that we have a giant war, which, by the way, somebody asked about World War III. We got to talk about World War III tonight. There's some sort of giant cleaning of the slate, which would involve a lot of violence and a lot of death and a lot of political disruption. And those people, and by the way, this could also take place during climate change. They basically have bought a bunch of land in places like New Zealand, and they have bunkers and weapons and guards. And they'll wait until the coast is cleared, and then they'll come out and they'll build their digital tech utopias. By the way, nothing that I'm talking about right now is like conjecture. Like the articles are all out there. They talk about this stuff. Like this is in books. Like if you read Kurzweil or Lanier or any of those other tech people, Wired had this article about virtual reality. I'm not making this up. Like I'm not just like putting on my little tinfoil hat beanie with the propeller. This is like all that they talk about. All you have to do is read their books. They do not hide this shit. This is all real. The other two solutions are that they find a new frontier. Virtual reality would be that new frontier, which would mean that all of us could go into our own tailored virtual realities where we don't have to deal with each other and we don't have to have our political fights. And we will go to our own virtual realities where we'll live out our fantasies. And we'll be in those worlds that aren't real and aren't material, and we'll just leave alone politics and secular matters. Like, it'll just go on without us, and those people, so going back to what I was saying about tech utopia, they'll be free to build their utopias because they can get away from us. They can just take care of their own thing once we're out of their damn way. The other one is, of course, to go ahead and go to Mars, which is, again, a new frontier. You have to keep thinking about exploration isn't just about going off and finding things. This is an important thing. This is a sort of a reframing thing when you really think about it. Exploration isn't just about going out and finding new things that nobody has found before. Exploration, in a lot of ways, is about expanding beyond your borders in order to take care of internal conflicts. You can push people off. First Crusades were about that. All of the people in Europe were just killing each other left and right. And they said, oh my God, go to Jerusalem and conquer over there. And they even said it out loud. Yeah, Robert says Lanier has walked that back. He has. Lanier, over the last couple of years, has kind of really apologized for his part in this. Kurzweil is gone. Kurzweil is never going to apologize, and he's making God knows how much money telling everybody about this. I bring up the Snyder Cut because one of the things to keep an eye on is something that we're all aware of, which is this sort of fandom or partisanship or what people call tribalism, which has its own problematic connotations. We are just absolutely digging ourselves into an intractable hole. And part of the problem is that consumerism has taught us that we express who we are through what we buy and what we identify with. Like these Snyder Cut people, if you watch them on social media, like they're talking about conspiracies, they're talking about Warner Brothers, like trying to sabotage the Snyder Cut because he's too real for them, right? And they've harassed people left and right and threatened people. I mean, it's the exact same thing. These fandoms are just like political parties and political identities. It's all about people expressing who they think they are or who they want to be and throw it out there and sort of and shape things. The people that we're talking about, the tech people, the people who would put us in a technological dystopia or a virtual reality or send us to Mars. Those people are they don't like us. They don't trust us. What they are doing is that they believe that there is no way whatsoever for us to move beyond this branding or identity through consumerism. They don't see any possibility for life on Earth getting any better. It's only going to get worse. And only by shutting people up and destroying the project, this is important, only by destroying liberal democracy, representative government, freedom of speech, all of those things, only by destroying those and giving us our consumer identities in dazzling 3D and God knows smells and tastes and all that, only by giving us all of that will they get rid of us and be able to make their utopias. It's a really incredibly cynical world, but it's not shocking. So what do we do? That's a big question. This is a hard one. This is a really, really hard thing. We have to have progressive grassroots movements. We have to start rejecting this bullshit. We have to start rejecting this idea of personal fulfillment through consumerism, because they've got our number. They have been psychologically manipulating us since the early 20th century, post-World War I. That's when the psychological appeals really began in earnest. And they have been so many steps ahead of us for so long. And consumerism and corporate appeals and psychological manipulations have just absolutely wiped out. Yes, I actually think that Lanier has, I think for a while he was talking about where it was going to go. I want to say "You Are Not a Product" was where he was saying that that's where it was going to go. But in the past couple of years, he started to push against it in terms of not diagnosing it. He started talking about what it could possibly be otherwise. Yeah, Lanier, I don't think, is like one of the malevolent operators here. Kurzweil is ugly stuff where he's like, we don't even need to teach people to read, really. Kurzweil is weird. Reading his shit is weird. But we have to reject this stuff. We have to move beyond it, and we have to start recognizing where we're being manipulated and how we're being manipulated. Somebody was asking later on about sort of getting beyond these sort of divisions, sort of. But I think that we have to start recognizing that we're not all individuals with completely free will. People don't like hearing that. People don't like hearing that free will isn't total. Because, and especially in America, Americans love the idea that they make all of their choices and that they're just completely above psychological manipulations. But we have to get beyond that, and we have to give up a lot of the Western civilization ideas that we have about consumerism and accumulation of capital and identity through consumerism. We have to start finding some sort of a grassroots movement. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And if we don't figure it out, we're in trouble. Riley Rooster. That's a funny name. Are you the one who was talking about corporations being more powerful than some nations? Yep, that's me. Why don't monopoly laws apply to Amazon, Verizon, McDonald's, Walmart, etc.? Well, I'll start with the second part of the question. They don't apply because the fates of corporations and the fate of the market has become synonymous with the fate of the nation. That doesn't mean what happens to them happens to us. In fact, it's inverse. What's actually happened with our economy is it is fallen victim to hypercapitalism, particularly post-Reagan, so much so that the market is actually much more of a measure of how effectively they can exploit us. And so that's one of the reasons why when things go bad for people, things go up for the stock market. It's not about us. It's completely removed, but it's still a ticking time bomb. And so you have so many politicians who, by the way, they stake the claim of their presidencies and their tenures. They stake it based on how well the stock market is doing and how well the economy is going. Basically, and this is one of the bigger problems in America. Oh yeah, Reagan was a much prettier, much more polished version of Trump. He was proto-Trump for sure. I had no idea what he was talking about at any given moment. But what has happened more or less is that politicians have become stewards or PR flacks. They go out and they play their ceremonial role. We vote for them. They come out and they talk to us. They give speeches and they try and, tell us what they're going to do or whatever. But more or less, they're sort of front men and women for a larger economic gain. It has grown to the point where hypercapitalism has taken off so much and inequality has taken off so much, and so much of government and so much of life in America has been ceded over to corporations, that at this point, we have reached a point where nations, more or less, were sort of incubators for corporations, almost like, what is it, like a cocoon or like a larval state, you know what I mean? Where it's like this thing, it started out tied to nations. Like I said, corporations were originally the limbs by which countries handled their empires, because they couldn't send their government over there, so they sent corporations over to exploit and carry out military and naval powers and exploitation. Eventually, because of hypercapitalism in this new order that we have, they have grown so large that they are not really part of a nation anymore. They don't pay taxes. They don't have an allegiance. There's no such thing as, oh yeah, we got crickets out here. It's nice. It's a beautiful night, gotta tell you. But they've grown so large that they're nationless. They are nations unto themselves. And I've said this before, and it's not pleasant, but it's pretty true. We're still thinking in nations. That's not what these people are thinking in. That's not how they manage things. They straddle nations. They're larger than nations. We can still talk about nationalism, and nationalism is one of the remaining contestants against this idea, but it's not even real. It's a lot of people who just want to make more money. I mean, that's what Putin is. Putin's part of that transnational thing. I mean, Kinzer is exactly right. It's a transnational crime syndicate. It's all about these people who are like pushing the idea of nationalism, but they don't mean it. Maybe they'll get white supremacist money out of it and power out of it. They don't mean that stuff. But these corporations, they've absolutely grown above and beyond us. Cindy, can you talk more about the Popish plot? That's one of the craziest things I've ever read. Yeah, so me too. So I wrote about this, an article in Gizmodo this week about QAnon. And it is depressing, but I will say really, really quickly, and I'll talk about the Popish plot after. It is depressing, but it looks a lot like the Gilded Age. And I have to tell you, there's a certain point where people are like, I'm not going to deal with this shit anymore, and I am going to get involved, and we're going to take power back. I think there's a real possibility of that happening. So I wrote this article for Gizmodo about QAnon and about historical precedents, and I think they're everything from the Book of Revelation, up to what happened after Protestantism erupted. The Popish plot is one of the craziest things I've ever read. So I'm drinking bourbon. We got Jim Beam Double Oak tonight. That's what we got tonight. So the Popish plot takes place in 17th century England. And of course, everybody knows this, that, England cuts ties from the Catholic Church and forms its own church, the Church of England, which puts the monarch at the head of the church. And, one of the things that you actually find at this point is that you have all of these different kingdoms that have their own versions of Christianity that suit them. Go figure. It's weird how that sort of faith comes about. And so they're very, very anti-French and very anti-Catholic. And they're totally afraid that people within England are going to betray them, like states within a state, almost a deep state, And so what happens is there's this period of time where people are really, really afraid of this state within a state, or, people who are loyal to the Catholics, which, by the way, is something that happened in America. It's not just in England. The state within a state, deep state thing is 100% across the board in most major nations for forever. So these two con artists come up with what we now call the Popish plot. And his idea, the main guy's idea, was that there was somebody trying to kill the king, and they were working behind the scenes to undermine England. They were going to kill him, and they were going to ruin England and bring it under foreign control. Sound familiar? That's New World Order. That's deep state, QAnon, all of it. It's a constant drum. So here's the crazy shit about it. So he makes up this rumor, and it starts like really gaining traction in England. It starts becoming like this pamphlet that everyone starts buying or reading or passing around to their friends. It goes viral. Eventually, the guy who pulls this off, he ends up in an audience with the king. And the king brings him in and is like, what's this about a conspiracy to kill me? And the king isn't totally won over by this, but I'll tell you, society's won over by it, and Parliament is won over by it. Parliament gets up because they're trying to capture the popular sentiment of the day, and they announce there is a conspiracy against the king by Catholic traitors and the Pope. There was no such conspiracy at all. Meanwhile, the guy who did this, the guy who made it up, the Alex Jones of 17th century England, he becomes a celebrity. He starts getting invited to all these parties. He all of a sudden people start trying to marry him off to their noble daughters. They start making like clothes for him. They start wining and dining him. They start talking about making him a noble. Like, he made it. He went viral, and he becomes suddenly incredibly powerful in England. And what ends up happening is he takes it a step too far. Yeah, Titus Oates. That's the one. So Titus Oates, he can't help himself, because all of these conspiracy mongers, it has to get larger and larger and larger, and they can't be happy with the grift that they've gotten. They have to keep growing it and growing it. And eventually he says, oh, the queen's trying to poison the king. The queen and the people around her are traitors. And the king's like, fuck this. I'm done. We're done. So they arrest Titus, and they arrest his conspirators. They pillory them, which, they put him up for display as people come by and beat them and throw things at them. He becomes just a total pariah. One of his conspirators is murdered because of the whole thing. It's one of the craziest things I've ever found. But it's QAnon, 17th century England. And then eventually, and this is the scary thing about it, and what I keep finding in my research in history and about conspiracy theories, QAnon is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely, on its face, ridiculous, and the things that they believe are ridiculous. But that doesn't mean that they're not changing culture. That doesn't mean that they're not affecting the Republican Party. It doesn't mean that they're not affecting the way people think about the world. These things lead to revolutions and genocides. I mean, like, these conspiracy theories, even if people don't even remember the name of the thing that implanted the idea becomes so large and it becomes so influential that it then changes the world after it sort of disappears. Popish plot, very, very weird. Existential haiku. We've yet to reach the total war phase of this situation. Embers smoldering everywhere. Do you think America could emerge from a third world war unscathed? I fear China's ability to quickly adjust its infrastructure to building for war. Nobody gets out of war unscathed. The closest thing ever was America in World War II. We were the only country coming out of it that had its industry still standing. No way we get out of a World War III unscathed. If that actually reaches a point of World War III, it's going to be madness. I think the bigger possibility isn't necessarily a world war, although that is possible, because it goes back to that economic problem I told you about. Because eventually all those internal conflicts, you got to grow. You got to find the solutions elsewhere. So if we're not going to Mars, we're not going to virtual reality, we're not going to have a police state that puts us down. You got to go somewhere. You got to put all those things elsewhere. And I'll tell you, the Republican Party is the type that could end up being on the wrong side of an alliance in a world war. I could see a lot of proxy wars. I could see a lot of things. Absolutely. Special ops are carrying out war every single day. I could see it being a drone war, an economic war. If it ends up being an economic war, we do not end up on the other side of that in a good way. Cyber warfare, absolutely. So it could lead to that. But yeah, I think China's ability to mobilize would be incredible. I mean, that's what happens when you're a dictatorship. Truly and honestly. Yeah, that could be really, really bad. So no, that's not outside of the question. Space war. Yeah. Cheers. Cheers to a space war. I'm sure wherever Ronald Reagan is, he's happy about the idea of a space war. He really loved that idea. Bill, you're right about tax dollars paying for the internet, but what does a different internet even look like? What's the famous quote? If you're not paying for a product, you are the product. I mean, that's what the internet is at this point. We paid for the internet to be constructed. For those who don't know, so much of actually, real fast, Christy says, "Did I see the new Adam Curtis documentary?" Absolutely, I did. Muckrake Podcast, I've already taped an interview with David Parsons from Nostalgia Trap that's going to air Tuesday on the Muckrake Podcast. It's about 40 or 50 minutes of us talking about the Adam Curtis documentary, America's obsession with reboots and nostalgia. Really good interview. If you get a chance when it comes out, I'm pretty happy with it. Yeah, so those of you who don't know, the internet was basically a system created by the United States through American tax dollars that was basically trying to be a communication system in case the Cold War led to a nuclear war. We paid for the internet to be constructed, much like we paid for roads, much like we paid for railroads, much like we paid for cables and communications and all that. And we should have the ability to either get taxes off the people who are benefiting off of it or be able to regulate it. A different internet doesn't look like this. We should not be surveilled. We should not have these psychological manipulations that we're talking about. That should not be allowed. They shouldn't be allowed to look at our history and metadata and figure out what we want before we want. And on top of that, to profit off of addicting us and radicalizing us, which is all that social media is doing at this point. It's not good. It's really, really wrong. And here's the problem, and this isn't going to be popular, but it's true. A better internet is probably an internet where we pay for more things. A lot of these companies realized that if they're just selling metadata and surveillance, they don't have to bother you with a paywall because you might not pay for the paywall. And on top of that, we've all become pirates. I mean, my God, ever since Napster, we've all realized we love a taste of getting things for free, and we'll work around paywalls as much as we possibly can. We have to rethink the way that we do that stuff. We have to rethink who we are and how we behave. So the internet probably is going to be a new internet would have to be a better internet that doesn't surveil us, doesn't keep track of us, doesn't manipulate us, and we have to pay for it. I know that that's not great. I know that's not popular, but it's probably true. Oh, Napster. Woo! That brings back memories. Used to put in one song in the Napster overnight and then go to bed and then wake up in the morning and hope your internet connection didn't crap out or that it wasn't like a file with a bunch of viruses on it. Whew, those were the days. Those were the days. Juxtapose GOP. If the Supreme Court overturns Roe, do you think there would be an exodus of young people out of states that banned abortion? Would colleges lose out of staters? So right now, and what just got brought up by Juxtapose is a really interesting way to frame it. And we have to talk about this. So one of the things that we have found is that the Republican Party has to gesture to its base to a certain extent to keep them as their base, right? But they also have to be careful because the corporations that they depend on and that they partner with and that they mostly represent have to pretend to be progressive because they know that if they're not progressive if they don't pretend to be progressive or they don't say progressive things or they don't tweet things about diversity and inclusivity and representation and all of that, then they'll be boycotted and they'll lose out on groups of people who are not going to spend their money with bigoted corporations. So they have to play a game. They can gesture to these ideas. But in a lot of these states, if they were to go ahead and ban abortion, and in the states where abortion would be banned, some of these corporations would have to pull up stakes because there would be a ton of public pressure. So what they actually want to do, and actually if you go back to Ronald Reagan, this is a pretty famous quote. Somebody asked him about what if we were to get rid of Roe v. Wade, and he's like, are you crazy? We're not going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. We just have to tell everybody we're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. What they want to do, the position that they want to be in, is that they want to erode from underneath Roe v. Wade. They want to make sure there are as few options as possible for people to get legal abortions while keeping it up, because it's like one of the best political cudgels they have. They can go out every single day and rail against it. And that means that the evangelical right would never possibly split from them. They don't really want to outlaw abortion. They want to talk about outlawing abortion and villainize people for in the idea of outlawing abortion while eroding it underneath legal abortion. They need that cudgel, and then they want to erode it from underneath. Do not get me wrong. They would love to do it. They would love to get rid of legal abortion, particularly to oppress and control women. But there's no way to do it in the current economic climate. Because, and by the way, that doesn't mean that it won't happen. That's as things are right now. Things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse. That means there's at some point, and I've talked about this a lot, the current iteration of the Republican Party are the people who watch Fox News and they don't know it's propaganda. They don't know it's a lie. Because for the longest time, there were Republicans who watched Fox News. They're like, oh my God, can you believe this bullshit? Can you believe people believe this? And then eventually the people who got elected after the Tea Party and in this current climate with the Trumpist Republicans, those are people who believe the bullshit. So there is a real possibility that eventually these assholes are going to take an actual swing at repealing Roe v. Wade. The ones who are currently in control, people like McConnell and people around him, they love having this as a cudgel. They love having this as a specter that they get to fight, like a big bad that they get to fight and continue to fundraise off of. Meanwhile, they will continue to make it more and more impossible for you to get a legal abortion in states where you can get abortions. So it's a weird, fluid situation. And it also has to do with who the Republican Party is and how they're moving. And eventually they're just going to jump, completely into the muck, and God knows where it goes there. K-Man. Hey, what's up, K-Man? Given that the market system in the U.S. isn't going anywhere in the U.S. anytime soon, should the aim be to have a Nordic-style system where we have a market economy but with heavy doses of significant government intervention and a stronger welfare state and higher taxes? That's not a bad goal. That's not a bad target to set up. I will say, though, and even people who years ago, wouldn't have possibly seen this coming. Capitalism in America is in trouble. And it goes back to Titus Oates. They can't help themselves. Because capitalism always has to grow. It's non-negotiable. They can have complete control over everything. And then they just have to do more and more and more and more. Where we are going right now, we are going to a place where, again, and I'm telling you, it might be in our lifetime, where they're all of a sudden, they're going to talk about kids working again. And they're going to be talking about, they've basically already gotten over the 40-hour work week and having to give people insurance. This whole independent contractor thing is one of the most insidious inventions of the modern era. And we're going to look back on it someday and be like, that is some bullshit. Bullshit. But yeah, I think capitalism actually is in trouble in America. I actually truly do. I think the next generation is not afraid of things like socialism and democratic socialism. I do not think so. So yeah, I don't think that aiming at sort of a Nordic style system is a bad goal. I think it's a very achievable goal. But I think assuming that capitalism in America is safe right now, particularly, I don't see it as safe. I think we're in a fluid situation. Anonymous. A couple of years back, I heard you say a big mistake was people expecting fascism to show back up in swastika armbands. What do you think it'll look like? Look around, man. I mean, really, it's the weird thing about it is that Italian fascism and German Nazism were fascistic movements that were rooted in a particular culture. And, it's going to be our own thing. It's going to look like what we've been seeing, which are people in giant pickup trucks with Trump flags going into cities and coming looking for fighting people January 6th. 100%. It's going to look like Trumpism. It is Trumpism. It's going to grow worse and worse and worse. I have to tell you, and I know people have been laughing about it, but this thing over the past couple of days where Trump supporters keep tweeting pictures of Trump and talking about how good he looks and how he's losing weight and how handsome he is and how much energy he has. That sycophantic shit that's not going to stop. We've been trying to warn people for a while, and when we were warning people, it wasn't grifting. It really wasn't trying to get attention. It's because the writing is on the wall. It really, really is. The writing is on the wall. This is a cult of personality. All of America's militarism, the propaganda that the right has been shoveling in this era of hypercapitalism since Reagan and through George W. Bush and the Forever Wars and what we have now, I keep telling people it's only going to get worse. With climate change, when all of a sudden you have your borders start to shrink and you start having crises, particularly on the state levels, and then all of a sudden you start having millions of refugees, and all of a sudden white supremacy will take over there and we'll have a looming economic crisis. It's all bad. I don't think they know it's part of the death process. Sarah, I don't think they do. I don't think that they do. They think it's a rebirth. They think it's a rediscovery, but that's what fascism is. It's the weaponized nostalgia coupled with white supremacy and that delusional anger about trying to revive a dying empire. It's a death cult. It's a death cult. Vivaldi's four-season landscaping. Trump has started asking for folks to donate directly to his PAC instead of the GOP. What are your thoughts on this? Grifting, man. Absolutely grifting. I mean, he's not going to miss out on an opportunity to make a little bit of money. That's all this is. That's all this is. It has been a grift from day one, but that doesn't mean that it also isn't real. I mean, he'll make money off of this as much as he possibly can. And then he might run for president. I don't think he's going to run for president again. I could be wrong, and knock on wood that I'm wrong. Or wait, that I'm right. Knock on wood that I'm right. I hope I'm not wrong. I think he'll play kingmaker. I think he'll pick somebody to work in his steed. A couple questions from now, somebody has to ask about Tucker Carlson, which we have to talk about, which I think is important. But this is a grift. It's who he is. He couldn't possibly walk away from free money. Yeah, no chance. And that's what he did with the GOP in the first place. He wasn't a Republican. It just so happens that he met the social and cultural and ideological criteria, which was make as much money as possible through white supremacy and white paranoia. I don't know if he'll run again. I don't think that he will. I think he's happier as an ex-president, to be honest. I think he's going to love all the candidates coming to kiss his ass. I think he is so excited about people coming to kiss his ass. Groggy Bones, is there any hope of breaking up international organized movements of neo-fascism? Yeah, it can happen. The problem is that the people who need to break it up, those people need to take it seriously. We were talking about on the Muckrake, like the FBI releases, God, I don't know, every year, every couple of years, they'll release a report that says the white supremacy and white supremacists are infiltrating law enforcement and the military, and that they're communicating with people around the world. They're building an international ring of white supremacist terrorism. You need to take it seriously in order to defeat it and to disrupt it. The problem is everyone's like, white supremacy is not a real thing. You got to worry about, Muslim terrorists or whatever, or people at the border or whatever. Americans are not comfortable talking about white supremacy. Its main threat, its main issue that is not dealt with. But yeah, we can break it up. We can stop it. Absolutely, we can do it. I mean, my God, I can't imagine the amount of laws that these people have broken. I mean, the people that I talk to who are in the know about international white terrorism, they're like, this shit's bad. I've been in the rooms, I've read the documents, I've read the communications like everybody else. It is bad. Really, really, really bad. And we need to stop it. Moo Young Kim says, do you think Tucker's attack on women and trans in the military is an attempt at divide and conquer, similar to when white started to include those of Irish and Italian descent? By the way, that whole thing, if y'all don't know this, like the idea of whiteness is not just, Lee, I was just talking about white supremacy in corporations. And the white corporations were founded in order to carry out white supremacy and slavery and exploitation. Found in my research. It's really, really weird and disturbing. So whiteness has never been a static concept. The way that we have come to define race is, again, based on white supremacy and economic exploitation. We came to define race the way that we did so that we could enslave people and so that we could destroy cultures and exploit cultures. What Tucker is doing is he's throwing a bunch of shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. He's doing a lot of A/B testing right now. And this whole feminization of the military, that's what Trump did in the very beginning. And if you remember, a lot of us were like, oh, I don't think he's going to be okay after doing this with, calling McCain a loser or whatever. People are not... I don't know exactly how to explain the Republican Party and the military, except for to say that they're not actually pro-troops. They're pro the idea of military force, but they go after them constantly. And the Republicans and the right are so obsessed with the idea of fading American military power that they believe that America's problems are because America hasn't kicked enough ass in the world and they've been restrained and feminized. And, if we just went into other countries and dropped the bomb and killed everybody who was there and assassinated families and arrested everybody, we'd be great. We'd be absolutely great. And if we could just go in and we were unrestrained and we weren't feminized in the military, we'd be perfect. So that's one of the reasons I truly honestly believe that Tucker Carlson, if he is not running for president, he's considering running for president. And he will get a shot. If he decides to run, he will be one of the front runners for the presidency. They need a showman. They need somebody who is willing to perform the act with as much shamelessness as Donald Trump. They need somebody to carry on. The problem with the people who are trying to replace Trump, Cruz, Howley, all of those assholes, they don't have it. They're not showmen. That's the problem. Tucker can go out and put on a good show, and I guarantee that if he does, a lot of it is going to be about strength through force and through the military. That will be where Tucker changes from Trump. Trump, of course, didn't really want to use the military. He was fine using bombs and special ops and all that stuff, but, one of his things was always criticizing going into force. Maybe the next turn to this, and this might be something that Tucker tries to push, and again, going back to what I was saying, when there's economic crisis, when all of those internal divisions are too tight, you have to go out and try and find and conquer and take territory. In a climate change economic apocalyptic scenario, a person trying to say that the military should go out and conquer the world to show how strong America is, particularly with the fascist cult that we have right now, I don't know how to tell you this, but that's really scary. That is really scary. And Tucker Carlson is exactly the type of guy who could come out swinging with something like that. That's something to think about. It's not a joke. It's a really, really bad thing. Okay, I have 4 questions left, but we are just about to get to 1 hour. Appreciate y'all coming out on a Sunday night. I hope it's at least somewhat nice. Like I was saying, it's getting ready to turn 8 p.m., but somehow or another it says it's going to 9. Time. What is time? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Cheers, everyone. All right. We got 4 questions left to go, and we'll finish up. And then I'm going to go look at my brackets and figure out. Somebody asked I was going to give my picks so far. I haven't looked at the brackets enough, but I'll give my picks before I go. Because why not? It's the most magical time of the year. Narrator asked, how do we unite the working class as opposed to falling into the culture war narrative? What do you say to someone complaining about cancel culture or Meghan Markle or whatever distraction of the week? Okay, so a couple things. One, we have to stop fighting the culture war with these people. Everything that they're saying is bad faith, reactionary bullshit. If somebody wants to talk about, and this is one of the things that is happening right now, is there's even rumors Meghan Markle's going to run for president, and that's something that's being pushed so hard on the right because of course they're pushing that. They're like, oh, Meghan Markle's talking about racism. It's like, why the hell are you talking about the British royal family? Ask them about material conditions. Talk to them about power. Talk to them about things beyond that trench warfare bullshit. I keep saying this. People keep asking, how do you talk to Trumpists? You don't talk to them. The only thing that you can possibly do, is to try and deal with the material conditions that have helped radicalize them. That's it. You cannot solve racism with them. You cannot solve sexism with them. You cannot talk them out of believing the lies that Fox News gives them, or that QAnon has told them, or what they've heard on Facebook. By going into that trench warfare, dichotomous Republican versus Democrat, blue versus red, dichotomous trench warfare, all it can possibly do is lead to more of that division culture war bullshit. And they're not even talking about politics anymore. This Dr. Seuss thing, if you thought that there was any actual talking of politics left on the right, I hope that the Dr. Seuss controversy solved that for you. I did a live stream last week talking about it on Friday. They reacted to the Seuss Corporation canceling, see, it gets in your vocabulary. They reacted to the Seuss Corporation deciding not to publish 6 Dr. Seuss books. They reacted to it by saying that Joe Biden had done it and the Democrats had done it. Nobody said anything about this. Nobody said a damn word about this. They reacted to it by going out and buying up all of the Dr. Seuss books published by the Seuss Corporation that decided not to publish those 6 books. They made them bestsellers. They funneled God knows how much money to a corporation that did the things that they don't like. They're so far detached from reality that speaking logic to them at this point makes no sense. The only thing that you can do is possibly look at the things that led them to where they are and try and deal with those things. And hopefully you can cool down the political environment. Hopefully you can actually make lives better to people who aren't doing that stuff and get better. But right now, it is so beyond the realm of logic or reality that it's impossible. No way. No possible way. There's no possible way to actually talk about them. So somebody, why talk about Meghan Markle? You can talk about economic inequality. You can talk about insurance. You can talk about infrastructure, healthcare. You can talk about education. You can talk about things that would actually make people's lives better. And they want to talk about fucking Meghan Markle and Dr. Seuss. It's maddening. But you can't. Those conversations don't do anything. Those conversations don't go anywhere. It actually makes sure that they go ahead and anchor down and drill down into their positions even further than they already are. The only thing you can do is try and take care of the conditions that led to Trumpism in the first place. It's incredible. All right, last three. Janelle Forsyth, what are your thoughts about Biden not doing a press conference yet? I wish he'd do a press conference, but I don't think it's a scandal. I think it is very funny and interesting and just bizarre to watch the media and pundit journalist class try and prove to everybody that they're not biased. After they spent the last 4 years criticizing Donald Trump and building careers and brands off of it, they now have to be like, yeah, why isn't Biden holding a press conference? And it's like, why didn't you tweet that every single damn day of Donald Trump's presidency? I think he should be holding press conferences. I understand why he's not. You know, they don't really want Biden out there that much. They don't really want him being a lightning rod. On top of that, it never really does anything good for anybody when you have your president out there taking questions at a press conference. It's strategic. I wish they would do it. I mean, he needs to be questioned and he needs to talk to the American people. I'm for it. But I also think the pundit class is just, they have not learned. They have not learned. And that is the thing that frustrates me every single day, is that they have not learned from the Trump years. It's like they all forgot what happened. And that is that spectacle overtook American politics and that they have played a role. And now they're all characters in it. Now they're all characters in it. With their tweets and their Twitters. They're all characters in it. Everybody knows the resistant pundits and journalists and all that. They've become characters in the spectacle. Oh, it's so tiring. And I tweeted about this today. Like, the problem is that Biden isn't creating a scandal every 5 minutes, so they have to create something. They have to create something. And so this is what they've decided. It's the best thing they've got. I can't believe they didn't go after the dog biting somebody. I can't believe that's not what they didn't go after. That's kind of crazy. I kind of thought for a second that the dog biting somebody would be the thing, but everybody likes dogs, so that would be very unpopular. All right, last two. Marianne, you gave out a pep talk to writing students on your Substack mailbag. That's right. If you haven't subscribed already to my Substack, what are you doing? I like it over there. You should go over there. And if you subscribe, I do a mailbag. We're talking about pizza and stuff the other day. I showed like the first, I think it was 8 pages of my novel that I'm working on. You should go over there. It's good stuff. But I was wondering if you had any advice for people who want to write but haven't gotten started. Writing is a skill. That's number one. Writing is a skill that you have to learn and improve. You have to read a lot. You have to write a lot. And I'll give a piece of advice because obviously everybody here, we don't have like a couple hundred writers here, but this is important. This is the best advice that I can give people. The only thing that you can control is putting your ass in the chair. That's it. It's working. And right now we live in an environment where we're overworked and we're overexploited or whatever. And then, I have a lot of people who will tell me, they're like, I don't have time to write. And it's like, I understand it, but it was like one of those things. I used to have a problem with writing, making sure that I wrote enough and I was got my ass in the chair, which is hard, treating it like it's a job. And then I actually had a thing. I moved down to Statesboro in the South. And it was the first summer that I was down here. And I got bit by a bunch of fire ants. I'd never, ever come across fire ants before. And I was like weed eating in flip-flops. Anyway, I had an allergic reaction. And I almost died. And like, I wasted that day. Like, I had to like get picked up in an ambulance and like rush to the hospital. I wasted that day. And I just had this moment where I was like, my God, my last day on earth could have been like just a really lazy sort of a day. And I was like, no, I'm going to start working. I was like, I need to like really double down. And that's when stuff started taking off for me. That's when I started publishing more stories and more books. And that's when this political thing took off. It was like showing up. It's putting the ass in the seat. It's deciding that you'll work. It's deciding that you'll put in the time. And, I had to do this thing where, I was like, I don't know what time I have to write. And then I started carrying around a little notepad, and I was like, okay, for like 2 weeks, I'm just going to write down everything that I do and how I spend my time. And I looked at my time and I was like, my God, I waste a lot of time. I can easily get an hour's worth of research or writing in here or there. And then I made the decision to do it. The hardest thing, or the easiest thing in writing or in any job, is to not do it. The hardest thing is to do it. That's the best advice I have. No More 45 says, what's something ridiculous you did as a kid? So I hadn't thought about this in a while. And it came up in a class a couple of years ago. And it was like one of those, how like some things you forget from when you're a kid, and then it hits like a lightning bolt, and then you remember it. And it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that was real. So when I was little, let's say 7, 8, something like that, I got really like into comic books. I was reading comic books all the time, like old 1970s, early 1980s X-Men and stuff like that. And I decided that I was going to be a superhero. So I put together a superhero costume, like husky little jeans, a blue sweatshirt, and like a green and yellow ski cap with eyes and a mouth hole. I got together this little fanny pack, and I got these little plastic Easter eggs. I filled them with water. They were bombs. And then I had an old Thundercats sword, like a plastic Thundercats sword that was starting to come apart, so I had to use tape around it. Anyway, so I decided I was going to be a superhero and I was going to fight crime. And so I waited until like my family went to sleep, when my mom went to sleep, when my grandparents went to sleep. And then in the middle of the night, I snuck out of the house and I ran around town looking for crime as like a little husky 7, 8-year-old kid with a plastic sword and Easter eggs filled with water. I never found crime, and I'm really lucky that I didn't. I think a lot now that I'm an adult about what would have happened if I would have found crime, how weird and inexplicable and unexplainable that would have been had I had been killed by a criminal and found in my costume. But yeah, I was the green mosquito is what I called myself, with the mask, running around town. Ran all over town, my little tiny hometown. That was one of the weirdest things I ever did as a kid. I did a lot of weird shit as a kid, but that's the thing that sticks out to me, and I think about a lot now. And I told my mom about it, and she was so upset that I did this. She was so upset that I snuck out and could have got hurt. She was like retroactively anxious about that. So. All right, I'm going to get off here in a second. Big week in some stuff. I'm on spring break, so I might do a couple of streams this week. I don't know. We got new Muckrake coming out on Tuesday. Like I said, a really good interview with David Parsons from Nostalgia Trap about Adam Curtis and American nostalgia, and also this idea of deep politics. It's cool shit. Really good interview. We'll have another one on Friday with the bonus episode for patrons. That's all you have to do is go over to patreon.com/muckrakepodcast. You'll get that stuff. Substack, I'll be doing a couple things, a couple articles I've been thinking over, and then I'm going to do a mailbag. I think on like Thursday or Friday, I'll do a mailbag. So all you have to do is become a subscriber over at jaredyatessexton.substack.com. NCAA tournament, I like both Gonzaga and Baylor. Texas looks really good. I think Georgetown could possibly have a couple of upsets. I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready for spring break. I'm ready for that. Mailbag is a write-in question and answer thing that I do over at my Substack. So yeah. Oh yeah. So for patrons of the Muckrake podcast, there is a Discord server, and there's an entire community and culture over there. They have a book club. How fucking cool is that? Smart people talking about good books. All right. That was a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out. Cheers. Let's do this in a couple weeks. What do you say? Be good. Be safe.